Thank you, Kathy. Really, I want to thank MeTRIC and thanks to the Eisenberg Family Depression Center for putting together this really fantastic symposium. It's been a lot of fun so far, and I think we've already discussed during some of the breaks many different projects that we hope to get engaged on. So I'm really excited to talk about wearable technology in the athlete. And first I'll just mention that our Human Performance and Sports Science Center is here at Michigan. We're working really to serve the university through the promotion and amplification of sports science research and education to generate new knowledge on human health and performance. And wearable technology really, I think, has a huge role in this. You've already heard from one of our team members today, Adam Lepley, and the work ongoing in the Michigan Performance Research Lab. And so these are my disclosures. We've had funding from Samsung, Apple, and Aura, but these sources had no role in the analysis or interpretation of any of the things I'll be presenting. I'm also a member of the Michigan Advisory Board for Intercollegiate Athletics, which provides an interesting window into how the athletic department may be dealing with some of these questions on performance and implementation of different types of technologies into the student athletes. So let me just start with sort of at least what my definition of wearable technology is, particularly as it relates to sports and exercise. So I'm considering wearable technology as an electronic device or devices worn on the body that really broadly speaking are used to collect data of a variety of metrics. So performance metrics such as how fast someone is going, how far they've gone, distance, location, and integrating that with physiologic metrics, cardiovascular response, heart rate variability, new devices measuring hydration or body temperature. Really with the specific use to track, monitor, and enhance physical activity, recovery, and overall health and wellness. So as I'm sure this audience knows now, this is really a huge market. The global forecast for sports wearables was almost $2 billion US dollars last year, with an estimated compound annual growth rate of 15% over the next 8 years. And smartwatches really make up a huge segment of this anticipated growth. And while this growth is really dominated by health, sports, and fitness applications, there's a lot of use in other non-sport industries as well, which are contributing to its overall growth. And we've seen a lot of that discussion so far today. So I'm going to introduce sort of a general athlete performance model to describe how wearable technology may be used to positively interact with the athlete. And we can typically think of a training cycle somewhat like the following. So cycles of both training and recovery with the goal to achieve positive gains or positive adaptation to help the athlete achieve their goal, have a win, have a PR. But sometimes due to overtraining or poor fueling or maybe improper technique, this can also lead to negative adaptations. And all of this together can influence our risk for injury. But if we take a step back, I think this sort of training cycle really fits into a larger macro cycle, which I'm presenting here on the right. So this is a general performance model that was proposed by Ertmer and Newby, and then adapted by Turing et al., which really describes sort of an overall planning phase here where the student athlete and perhaps with some coaching staff is identified, or not the student athlete, excuse me, I'll get to that. The athlete is defining some kind of goal, and importantly, understanding where the gap lies between where they currently stand and where they wish to be, and then defining some sort of plan, training plan, action plan to reduce that gap and further advance their abilities. Then comes the training task or training and recovery task. And here is where we'll dig into in a little bit about the importance of wearable technology to improve our ability to self-monitor the task during the actual task performance. And then checking about those outcomes and how they relate back relative to the original training plan. Throughout this process and after the process, it's important to really have a critical assessment of what those outcomes were and what that performance was. And then again, checking those outcomes relative to the goal. And then after the fact, reflecting on those outcomes, reflecting on what went right, what went wrong, gaining new strategy, and then translating that thought to some level of planning, which then goes back to begin this cycle again. How far did we come? Where did we fall short? And where should our new goals be? And then superimposed on top of all this really is the understanding that in order to make this work, and the studies have shown that the most successful athletes who progress through the cycle are those who have strong measures of self-efficacy, motivation, and effort. It's one thing to identify a goal, and we sort of talked about this a little bit earlier this morning, but it's another thing to actually have the motivation and effort to carry that out. Okay, so I'm going to sort of break each of these parts of this cycle down just to talk a little about wearable technology in each space. So in terms of the planning and the overall sort of goal identification, like I said, we typically think about athletes and the athlete-coach connection, where the coach recognizes where the athlete currently is, what their potential might be, and then developing a plan to help reach them, bridge that goal. This is a little different than what we traditionally will think about for wearable technology right now, right? So a lot of wearable technology is telling us to close our rings, reach our 10,000 steps, stand for 12 hours a day. And we've already seen earlier today how these goal-setting conditions have evolved over the time of wearable technology, allowing us to pause certain types of goals over a period of time. At the same time, the goal-setting algorithms are advancing so that it's more than just step count, more than just sleep hours. For instance, here on the left, Garmin has a feature where if you're attempting a 5K or a 10K or a half marathon, you can put in your goals, and then they'll deliver some type of goal training program for you to follow. So how well do we actually follow the goals, however, set by these, by our smartwatches? So this is a paper from 2021 where the authors interviewed 50 wearable device users. And what they found was that those users who had a high motivation for behavior change, and those athletes who use both internal to themselves and watch-based training goal strategies were really able to lead to significant behavior changes that extended beyond simple watch cues. And in contrast, sorry, it's very touchy, those with a very high motivation to change, but who relied solely on watch-based leadership strategies as opposed to their own, showed some level of compliance change, but the inability to then superimpose and adapt new training goals based on what they were learning. So these gains were really only limited to the watch instructions only. So I think what this is sort of identifying is the really room to grow in this planning and goal setting stage from a wearable technology perspective. So the next phase of the performance model really is how we most often think about wearable device technology as a device that we can use to monitor the task at hand and really provide real-time feedback for performance in the moment. This is a study of almost 4,000 runners from Eindhoven. It's a few years old now, so certainly wearable technology has advanced in terms of the metrics since then. But in 2016, they surveyed these runners to try and understand what they wanted most from their wearable devices and what type of data they were looking for. And so a majority said that they were looking for things like distance, time, speed, and heart rate. That's shown here. And then they asked them, what would you actually do with the data? So you can see that over 75% of those runners across different competition ranges or different performance levels said that they actually do review the data session after a run or after a workout. And a little bit less, but still over half these runners monitor that data over time. So the ability to track their performance data over a period of time. We'll return to this table near the end of the talk, but want to keep sort of these values in mind about the ability to review your performance and monitor it. So we've talked about device accuracy now in several different workshops, but I'm going to just talk about a few different performance metrics and what leads to potential error in those devices. So most commonly in athletic wearable devices, things like distance and speed are either evaluated by a global or local positioning system, or by using inertial measurement units. So global locally positioning systems use, in the case of GPS, circulating satellites to pinpoint the athlete's location within space. And the same concept is used in an LPS situation where you have sensors surrounding the athlete at different locations within a stadium. And so there's limitations as to the sensitivity of how close these different systems can detect motion. And the most common error sources for these devices are overhead coverage for GPS, and then different environmental constraints within the stadium or within the arena for local positioning systems. In the cases where overhead coverage may be very high, say you're running the Chicago Marathon and there's a lot of skyscraper coverage, a lot of our smartwatches now will revert then to an IMU-based system where there's high overhead coverage. And there, simply by using anthropometric references about limb length and assumed stride length, they'll pick up on motion measured estimates of overall distance. There's other foot pod sensors or ring-based sensors where here the common error really results from placement of the devices and then variations in speed and different motion patterns that are different from what the assumed patterns would be based on the initial setup. The other common metrics used would be heart rate or cardiovascular responses, and these are commonly used by either a PPG-based sensor or an ECG-based sensor. The PPG sensors, as we know, are most commonly on our watches in a reflectance mode, and the error sources from these really derive, we think, from four primary outcomes: motion of the device itself, underlying tissue thickness that may obscure some of the local volume changes in blood, fit of the device. So if you compress the device too far on the wrist, you can occlude the blood vasculature. And then, as we mentioned in the past panel, skin tone is also known to interfere with this device error. More common EKG type systems really are the chest straps that somewhat preceded the wearable device heart rate monitors or preceded the wrist-borne heart rate monitors. And these ECG sensors have similar but a little bit different common error sources. So again, fit of the device, perhaps electrical interference from static electricity that might be coming from the uniform that's over the sensor, and then even things like signal communication. So things that might be interfering with transmission from the source at the chest strap to a measuring device that's distal to that. Hopefully you've seen some of the posters from the MyPR lab that were up in that corner, and Adam had mentioned our work in looking to really try and understand not only device validity, but what factors contribute to that validity across a variety of different subject demographics. So I'm just going to now give you a couple examples of how we've used wearable technology to assess performance and hopefully improve performance, both in individual and in team-based situations. So we've had a collaboration with the University of Michigan men's golf team to try and understand how autonomic stress and heart rate can be used as a surrogate measure for performance in these student athletes. So we performed a study in 9 Division I student athletes. All of these student athletes had a handicap greater than 0. So that means that on average they're scoring better than par in their performances. These players underwent a series of drills in which they were randomized to 6-foot or 8-foot putts, and their make rate over the 10 putts actually were quite similar. So 63% make rate on the 6-foot putt, 68% on the 8-foot putt. All of these athletes were fitted with a heart rate monitor during their performance trials, and this is an example of some of the data that we're seeing. So I'm showing you in blue typical 8-foot putt heart rate trace, and in red, a typical 6-foot putt heart rate trace. So remember that, that the overall performance rates was very similar among the two, although slightly reduced in the 8-foot putts. And what you can see is we flagged the data for when the student athlete began the drill, when they walked up and took a practice swing, and then had contact with the ball. And you can see a significant increase or elevation in heart rate between when the player began the drill and went up to their practice swing, maybe in anticipation of what was to come next, and then it comes down at the point of contact. But really significant differences between the difficulty of the putt in heart rate measures. We did a further study where now before each putt, we induced either a cognitive load or a cognitive stressor by implementing the Stroop test. So if you're not familiar with this test, it's where we hold up a flashcard and it says red and the color blue, and you have to tell what the color of the text is on that. So this is highly stressful. That accentuated the heart rate elevation much more than just a simple jog in place and elevated heart rate, and substantially reduced performance. So we're interested in using this data to really understand how the athlete performs in a moment of stress, and maybe how they can reduce either that cognitive load by monitoring their individual heart rates. That's at the individual athlete level, and wearables are also very highly prominently used at the team sport level. So these are most typically used in forms of the GPS or the local positioning type sports. This is, I'm just showing one of the most common types of devices. This is called Catapult, but it uses GPS or local positioning to monitor player, what they're calling player load, which is basically the integration of all the different motions and changes in direction of the player during a game or a match or a practice. And these sensors can be integrated with a heart rate sensor to monitor different data streams at the same time. We performed a retrospective assessment of the 2019 University of Michigan football team and evaluated a series of practices and drills using the Catapult Vector device. And so you can see across, we monitored player performance across 36 practices across 3 days of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And this took into account 330 different drills, which were categorized into individual skill-based training, special teams training, or whole team training. And I'm not going to go through all the data, but just sort of show you some examples of the types of data that you can get out from this type of data collection, and how it may be used to better standardize training or performance throughout the week. So I'm showing on the top graphs here sprint instances that were greater than 15 miles per hour for any of the players. And at the bottom, directional changes or instances of high direction change throughout the practice. In the left column are the wide receivers, and the right column are running backs. And then within each graph, you see individual teams, special teams practices, and then team-based practices. And just to draw out, for instance, our wide receivers, in this case, really showed very similar amounts of high-speed sprint drills across all three types of drills. And in contrast, the running backs really peaked their speed during special team drills, independent drills very low, and then team-based drills a little bit in the middle. And then in contrast to that, directional changes or patterns of high motion of multi-directional running, you can see these are highly based on individualized skill sessions that were focused on the highest directional changes across position. You can also see in some of these a pattern of reducing directional changes or reducing instances of high sprint as the players move from Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So this type of data is useful for both understanding what the player is doing throughout the week, but also when compared to in-game data to prepare the athlete for the types of activities that they anticipate being used throughout the game. Okay. And this is just an old article from MLive that described the Michigan basketball's use of a GPS system to monitor player performance. So here you can see the device, the sensor being put in the back of this player's jersey. And this is just showing somewhat de-identified player load throughout a game. But here's the quotes that I wanted to draw your attention to. So this was back when Coach Beeline was leading the team. And what he says was, Catapult has allowed him to quantify our players' workload and better manage the days leading up to the game. And what he says is, for 40 years of coaching, he really had no idea what the overall player load or player activity level was throughout the season. It was really mostly based on his feel for how tired they looked throughout practice session. So that's one element of it. The second element that was implemented was understanding that this is important not only for managing player load, but also for understanding players who may not be playing in a game, how their fitness may actually deteriorate over time if they're not receiving the high number of minutes that occur during a game. So here's a quote from redshirt freshman Austin Davis, who was playing sparingly in 9 of Michigan's 20 games. They were noticing a drop in player load through him, and then use that data to make up for lack of game action by having additional workouts either before or after a game. This is at the college level. Our center has sponsored a student, Lauren Antonio, based on need from the Detroit Pistons to have a student intern come in and help monitor their player performance, their wearable device technology. So we're happy that Lauren is applying this downtown with the Pistons. And this is not only important for professional sports and able-bodied sports, but has novel applications in adaptive sports situations. So we have an additional internship, which is a collaboration with our former postdoc, Jeff Burns, at the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, to try and understand what types of sensors would be needed to better understand wheelchair or adaptive basketball player load during a typical game. So Alex Begley is working on developing some new sensor code really to understand how the player and their adaptive device both interact during wheelchair basketball. We've expanded this internship model out a little bit more, and I'm happy to report a new collaboration with the athletic department here at Michigan to really look at their sensor use and place students who are interested in working in the context of high performance sport in a technology and data management role. We've recruited we've made a call for our first recruitment of student device technologists to come and learn and be placed on some athletic teams in the next few months. And this is a nice collaboration between the School of Kinesiology, Department of Orthopedic Surgery, and Michigan Athletics. So I'm going to stay on the concept of, or the topic of student athletes for just a moment. And as we shift our attention to the student athlete, they're really a unique model for understanding factors that are associated with athletic performance. And it's really no surprise that student athletes really have a high demand on their time throughout their season. So demands of 20 hours per week of practice and competition. That doesn't include time to travel to practice, time to travel to competitions, training table, rehab, recovery, compliance meetings, regulatory meetings, study hall, academic tables, voluntary additional training, and also a high cognitive load. And if you look at the time spent on activities per week, this is data collected from the 2019 NCAA goal study, you can see that only about 20% of time was actually spent on the playing field, and then a large bulk of their weekly hours spent doing other important things, academics, socializing, and other extracurricular activities. So we think that the time and the activities that are spent outside of sport may actually play as an important role in athlete availability or injury reduction risk as their in-sport activities. We've had a 5-year longitudinal program with the men's and women's cross-country teams at Michigan to better understand the impact of sleep and other risk factors on bone stress injuries. So bone stress injuries are a high-risk bone injury that can cause an athlete to drop out from the season as the bone recovers. So with Kathy's help, we administered a 5-question athlete-specific sleep survey to understand between the start of the season in August and mid-season in October, how sleep patterns were changing over the course of the season as training and academic stress ramped up. And the data is a little bit noisy, but this is early data that's showing you that of the student athletes whose sleep scores worsened by 4 to 5 points, 100% of those had a bone stress injury. But we know through this meeting that survey instruments really provide an incomplete snapshot of what are continuously changing parameters. And the hope is that by using digital health tools, we can provide these non-invasive, ecologically valid momentary assessments of factors that may be associated with injury. So with sponsoring and funding from the Bioscience Initiative at Michigan, we've been recruiting first-year non-student athletes, I want to make that clear, to participate in a study that looks at the impact of physical activity and sleep on student performance. So in this study, participating students receive a Fitbit and a custom mobile app, and this aggregates their wearable data through daily ecological momentary assessments of mood, social connectivity, and academic engagement. And so I'm just going to show you a couple examples of some of the data that we're describing. And so, we can see that wearable technology is describing these non-sport behavioral patterns in very granular ways. So this is one of our cohorts. This is from a fall semester of 63 first-year, again, non-student athlete students. And it's showing the average nightly sleep minutes across the semester. And the way we've graphed this is the black line is the average, and the orange lines are the weekends, and the orange blocks are university breaks. So you can see this periodicity where sleep is peaking on the weekends and then goes way up in the mid-fall break, and then surprisingly during the Thanksgiving break, really no change. But we have these noticeable elevations. We can also see a similar periodicity when we look at step count. And I thought this was very interesting. You can see, again, steps elevating and peaking in a same periodic manner, peaking Thursday or Fridays, and then coming way back down on, Fridays and Saturdays coming way back down on the Sundays. And then again, you can see this dramatic drop in physical activity here in the October break, and then again in the Thanksgiving break. So we think that we can apply this model to our student-athlete model, and by understanding the physical demands of the student-athlete off the playing field, in this case, we may be able to understand the overall energy demands of the college athlete throughout the entire day. Low energy availability, where energy intake fails to match the energy output, can lead to some significant clinical features, such as female athlete triad syndrome, which really drives hormonal dysfunction and bone loss. So we're interested in using wearable technology to gain a better understanding of overall activity levels in the student athlete. So I think that the future of wearable technology really promises even more features that might be of interest to the athlete. As Adam Lepley had mentioned, we've recently embarked on multiple collaborative studies with Samsung to validate some new smartwatch metrics, including things like body composition and sweat loss during a workout, to better understand how well those can be applied to the athlete. And as wearables continue to evolve, I think we can envision that next generation wearable technology can create these real-time contextualized digital biomarkers that can integrate cross-disciplinary signals to really monitor health, adaptation, and injury susceptibility in athletes of all abilities. But I want to come back to this, this model of athlete performance. And we can really understand now how the wearables, I think, are becoming very good at monitoring the task and allowing the athletes to check that task relative to their stated goals and their training plan. But really, how good are wearables at the remaining steps? Reflection, development of new plans based on emerging results, especially with messaging systems that I'm showing here. So are we really using the data provided by wearables to actually impact change, or simply as a way to collect data over time and aggregate that data? So I'm going to return to this Eindhoven running study and add in a row that I didn't show before. And they asked the number of runners, in this case, how many actually use the data to adapt their training. And while the numbers for data collection and aggregation were upwards of 50 to 75%, the numbers of runners who were actually using that data to impact and change their training plan over time were 20 to 25%. So the use of the wearable device as a coach and as a motivational tool, we've heard some of that before earlier. I think we can imagine with the evolution of new AI-generated algorithms, we can sort of perhaps envision an AI-generated coach really helping us to bridge that gap between the planning stage and the reflection stage and going back to the planning stage. But I'll just ask maybe and close with this, is that really necessary? Or maybe are we being a little bit lazy with our wearable technology usage? And I'll finish with this story of Nicola Oleslegers. Nicola is a high jumper from Australia who during the 2021 games was seen returning to her bag after every jump. She'd pull out a journal to write in. And so when she was interviewed, what are you doing? What's in your journal? She said, that after every jump, I give myself a rating of 1 out of 10 for every single component of the jump. The start, the run, the lift. I bring this to competition so I know what areas I did well in, what I need to work on, and choosing to focus on improving one element of the next jump. So during her performance at the highest stage, she was self-monitoring, assessing, reflecting, and adjusting her strategy to achieve that goal. And as a result, she won the silver medal in Tokyo and repeated this experience again this past summer in Paris. So I think I'll close with the thought that while wearable technology really can continue to help us refine our ability to self-monitor and assess performance, we really have a large ways to go in terms of the reflection and planning stages. And I think it's really continues to be up to us what we choose to do with our data to better improve our own personal performance. So just thanking some of the funding agencies who've supported our work over time, really want to highlight the work from the Michigan Performance Research Lab and Adam Lepley, Amanda Melvin, and Sarah Davis in particular for their work. And then I'll close. Thank you for any questions that you may have.